every blessing. Tune my heart to sing my grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing. Call for songs of loudest praise.
Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Whatever was written in earlier times was written for our learning, that through perseverance and the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope."
Thank you, Linda Ray, for reading the scripture. So my message today may come across in a pedantic way. So believe when I say I don't have all the answers. I only know my experiences that are wrapped in the gospel of love and grace. And so I invite you to listen with open hearts this morning. Several weeks ago, Reverend Jeremy asked for prayers for a family of a woman who'd been helping someone else as a caretaker. When she became ill, it was then that we were aware of who she was. We first heard her name, but probably we won't ever know the depth of who she was, or even if she realized the difference that she made in the world caring for someone else. In a past life, I was a nurse. I worked post-op, and most of my patients recovered and went home to live productive lives. That was back in the days when post-op patients stayed in the hospital for several days, unlike Cindy, who was out the same day for a hip. I just am amazed. But things like appendectomies and hysterectomies, people would be in maybe for a week. Today, they go home the same day. I've always been aware that I chose to work as a servant to those in need, but I didn't always like the way that I was treated like a servant. When Mike was invited to go to work in Louisville, Kentucky, we both decided I would stay at home with the children, which I loved, but I missed hospital work. So we all became involved with St. Paul United Methodist Church in Louisville. We taught Sunday school. All of our children were involved in different groups at church, including administratively as teenagers. The one thing that I really loved doing there was catering every week for 130 people. There was a little bit of a charge for each meal, but most of that was to cover the food cost. This church was an upper middle class church where we barely belonged, according to some of the congregation. And as the cook, I was reminded by several of the more well-heeled women of my status. When I wasn't invisible, I was ordered about, and that stung. But we love the church, we love the youth program, and we love the pastor. And I love to cook, so I put up with it. But as I continued my journey into ordained ministry, I have never forgotten how that feels. Today in the churches I serve, I will scrub floors because I won't ask someone to do something that I won't do. I clean toilets, I paint walls, I work with construction workers. And I realized in my call to professional ministry that I need to take time to invite people into a spiritual veil of love and grace and not worry about toilets. And that's a skill I'm still working on. It's surprising how deep those small wounds can penetrate and become louder than the voice of God's call. All that is to say, we all have our own stories. We all have a sense of status, where we belong and where we think we belong, or even worse, where I think you belong and where I think you don't belong. For me, that is such a part of the broken relationships with one another, from a personal basis to our national basis. So let me invite you into our ancient wisdom for today. The ancient wisdom is preparing us for Thanksgiving and how we can hold this year in a different way. These three scriptures speak as a reminder to us all that we have, and all with whom we come across in day-to-day activities. And they were created with a lot more thought than we've ever given to any one particular thing or any particular person. Our joy with life should be never ending, even in the midst of the sadness of death, the pain of unemployment, the frustration of remote learning, or even wearing a mask. I truly believe if we let a small thing like wearing masks become more important than seeing the invisible people of our world, then we are in deeper poop than we can get out of, even with the president-elect that we are celebrating. Jesus didn't give us dogma. He didn't give us anything we had to believe. Rather, he gave us instructions on how to live an ethical life, a holy life, a whole life. He offered us a spirituality of actions and attributes, gratitude, yes, and love, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, and a sense of faith in something. When these emotions arise unbidden, we are expressing our pure nature, our Christ consciousness. In this way, the light within is not a metaphor, it's an embodied spirituality. Worry, which I'm good at, is just the opposite of gratitude. Don't worry, friends tell us. Such advice, similar to the counsel of Job's friends, is not really all that helpful. It's not helpful because we are actually programmed to worry as self-protection. It's not a character flaw, but it is part of our inborn survival mechanism. We're rewarded by evolution for remembering the bad experiences more than the good experiences to protect ourselves. In our distant past, we probably worried about those large paw prints on a path that we were walking. But today we worry about the economy and politics and the value of our investments. We worry about what will happen to our health down the road. And basically we worry so well because we practice it all the time. But if you're mindful during the day, noticing the smell of flowers or the smile of a stranger or a moment of deep interaction with someone, you can feel your nervous system calm down. If you hang with it for 10 to 20 seconds, you will actually rewire your neurons. Anytime during the day, you can have a moment of sacred presence, even with the least of these. During this moment of presence, we are actually installing the good into our nervous system, laying the groundwork for a grateful life. We are not simply made by God, we are made of God. This is the deepest sort of noticing, of paying attention. The consequence of this kind of attention, this kind of noticing, is radical amazement. Every Sunday morning when I have time with the children, I experience radical amazement. Gratitude that wells up from the inside, not layered on top like a blanket. The quote of "all is well and all shall be well" becomes our living truth, not just our hope and prayer. If, as Maya Angelou says, gratitude is the pillow on which we kneel, then it is awe, radical amazement that brings us to our knees. And the awe comes when we notice. This is what Jesus is telling us. We are used to naming our emotions like a digital radio. You push a button and we're sad or we're angry or we're happy or we're grateful. But I think of gratitude more like an old-fashioned radio. Many of you will remember that, maybe not all of you. As the radio waves shifted on air currents, we needed to regularly adjust the dial to stay on the program we want. The station of gratitude, love, compassion, and forgiveness. To extend the metaphor, God's grace, which we experience as awe or joy, is the air itself on which all the stations, our emotions and feelings and moods, arrive and dissolve, come into focus and disappear again. We are the radio. Practicing gratitude is learning to keep the dial turned to the right station in our lives. And sometimes that station needs to move. Sometimes we need to be on that sad station. And sometimes our joy overflows. But living a grateful life, experiencing the joy in all of God's creation, is about noticing what the stations are moving through, the air itself. Of course, we don't notice this all the time. I would say we rarely notice it. That's why a gratitude practice is so important. But the more we practice gratitude, love, and compassion, the more we become aware of God's grace that infuses all of our emotions, both pleasant and unpleasant. Sitting with my dad day in and day out as he completed his journey in this world, I am so very grateful for those sacred people in scrubs and uniforms who came into my dad's room. Most were nurses, heroes of today. Many were medical assistants whose physical touch was more pronounced as they bathed and cleaned and brushed each sacred person lying in a hospital bed. Such holy and sacred work. And then the most invisible of all, the housekeepers. Most were young and all were very polite and efficient. And I never forgot to sincerely thank them for their most important work. Each person who entered my dad's room was equally important to his care. And for that, I am gratefully thankful. But there are others too that we overlook. Grocery store clerks, stock people, servers, cooks, trash pickup, teachers, janitors. They all do indeed work for us. But who do we work for? How do we want to be treated? In today's political climate, we must notice all people. We must realize there are stories of hardship and joy for someone who washes cars or the car factory owners. There is no one better person than the person you are talking to. No one, whomever that person is. And yes, we need to talk to people. My kids always rolled their eyes when I started chatting with the sales clerk at the grocery store or the librarian. But now they do it too. People do not want to be invisible. Some jobs require a silent manner to do their jobs with efficacy. Bus drivers, soldiers, servers, and others whose silence is necessary. But silence does not equal invisible. Migrant workers, floor scrubbers, light bulb changers, shoemakers, coal miners, so many silent, invisible workers. I invite you now, if you want to write in the chat, those whom you feel that we overlook every day, but are important people in our lives. How can we honor all and thank all who help us and make our lives safer, healthier, and more rewarding? Today, I am grateful. Grateful for parents, children, birthdays, and congregations who love one another. We can be more than grateful. We can show gratitude. Let it be so.